Hello, everyone. I think we'll get started. My name is Ioana Sandroya. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Hong Kong Sociology Department, and it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Frank Dobbin. So, what can I say about Frank? I think, if you ever find yourself in the position of needing to sort of understand economic sociology like I did a few years back, I think you can actually just go, this is a pro tip, go to Frank's Google Scholar page and then sort of read a bit chronologically through some of the pieces. And you can basically see the development of economic sociology, to which I think he's very much contributed, and well beyond areas of the discipline like organizational sociology and historical sociology as well. And so today, Frank is presenting, as you can see from his latest book with Alexandra Kalev, an academic sort of study, an academic achievement in a way that is very, very relevant given current debates, but I think also a book that has had wide influence in sociology and management and beyond. And it's the sort of book that is read outside of academia as well, which is really special and a treat that, when that happens. So it's my real pleasure to introduce Professor Frank Dobbin, who will share Getting to Diversity with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ioana, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here. Ioana Tehrani. It's been Michelle and I have been here for 3 weeks now. We've had just a so interesting, of course, this part of the country. And the department is so vibrant and lively. So we've had a lot of great chances to talk to people and get to know some people who we'd already known a bit, some people who we hadn't known but know the work of. The staff has also been fantastic. Tina and Ellen, Mary helped to put this afternoon together. So just very grateful to be here, and very exciting to talk about some of my team's work on diversity management. I gave a talk in the department about diversity management for faculty and how effective faculty diversity programs have been generally in promoting the diversity of the faculty. And that work really came out of the project that I'll talk about today, which culminated in a book 2 falls ago called Getting to Diversity, What Works and What Doesn't. I wanted to present this because it gives you a sense of what our more general findings are across many years of research on this topic. And the general pattern is contrary to what most people expect to find when it comes to diversity programs. If you're still waiting for a seat, please come in. I myself was stuck waiting for an elevator for a while, so yeah. So no fault of your own if you're a few minutes late. So in this book, we look at data from over 800 companies with over 8 million workers. We follow them from 1971 to 2015, thanks to really excellent federal data on workforce diversity that began to be collected in the 1960s, but the data started to be in quite good shape in 1971. So we follow these from 1971 to 2015. And we look at the diversity programs, all sorts of programs that these companies put into place in those years. And we're trying to evaluate the effects of those programs on the actual diversity of the workforce. And today I'll just talk about the managerial workforce. So the question is, if you put in X or Y, so we have year-by-year data on what the workforce looks like. And we have year-by-year data on what diversity programs you have. And we also have data on what the non-managerial workforce looks like. And we have 10 categories of employees. I'm going to talk about the effects on managers. But for example, in the model, we control for non-managers in the corporation's workforce. We control for what the state workforce looks like, what the industry workforce looks like. All kinds of hiring and employment and promotion practices generally, and all kinds of diversity anti-harassment, work-life programs. So we throw these all into the same model, and we're able to pretty well assess the effects of individual programs on the subsequent change in workforce diversity. Now, today, I'm just going to talk about models where it's really one big model I'm talking about, but I'll show you slides that show the effects of different interventions that are thought to promote diversity. So I'll just talk about the managerial workforce today. So in the first slide, I just want to show you what the problem is. So this is data on all private sector corporations in the United States between 1971 and 2018. That's 2018. So we're looking at a sample of these data, but this gives you a sense of what the problem we're addressing is. If you look at the two bottom lines, which are Black and Latino women, you'll see that in the 1970s, well, let me just explain what each line is. The green line is Black women. So in 1971, it starts at about a little more than 1%, somewhere between 1 and 2. So what that line is capturing is the percent of all Black women in the corporate workforce in America who are managers. So what's your likelihood of being a manager? If you're a Black woman in 1971, 1%, 1.5%. So that increases to about 4% by 1983. So it increases pretty significantly. But then between 1983 and 2018, over the next 35 years, it increases from 4 to a little over 5%. So about a 1% increase over 35 years in your likelihood of being a manager if you're a Black woman. So look at white men. So they're at about 16%. So how long would it take for Black women to get to be equal to white men? 200 years, approximately 200 years at this rate, at the rate we've seen over that 35-year period. Hispanic women, Latin women are doing a little bit better here. They move from 4 to pretty significantly 6%, pretty clearly 6%, but it's still going to take more than 100 years to get to 16%. Black men are doing a little bit better in 1983, but 35 years later, so they're at 6%, 6% likelihood if you're in corporate America and you're a Black man that you're a manager. 35 years later, the same, 6%. Latino men, it starts at 7%, dips a bit, and they get back to 7%. For Black and Latino men, they will never, at this rate, reach equity with white men. They'll never get to 16%. So that's the problem. You know, people look around in the US and they'll look at a couple of examples, 3 Black CFOs in the Fortune 500. Oh, we're making huge progress. But overall, Black and Hispanic workers are really making very little progress. So I want to talk about 4 approaches that companies have taken to promoting diversity, 3 of which work, but are very rarely used, and 1 of which dramatically backfires and everybody uses it. Dramatically backfires as in actually reduces the diversity of the managerial workforce. So the approach that backfires is the idea that the problem lies in the heads of people, mostly discriminatory white men managers. And if you could just change what's in their heads, you could eliminate discrimination and equalize opportunity in workplaces. So there are 3 approaches to doing that. 1 is through diversity training. So what does diversity training do? You go into a room, it might be a room like this. Somebody's standing, can you hear me without the mic? Somebody's standing up at the front. They're showing you slides about bias. They probably have asked you to take a little test before you come in, which is an implicit bias test. So you'll know that you're biased. They want to rub your nose in that. You're biased, everybody's biased, so are you. You are the problem. You are why we have inequality in the workforce. And so here is how we're going to threaten you with sanctions if we find you acting on these biases. And here's how the company will be sanctioned if the federal government finds discrimination. Now, that's just not a good way to get people to be part of your program, to convince them that they're the problem, that they need to personally change the biases that are going on in their heads and their own behavior. So you won't be surprised, probably, to see this slide showing what this shows is that after companies put in the most common form of diversity training, which is legalistic anti-bias training, what I just described. You're biased, here's what the law will do to sanction you. They see significant decreases in 5 historically underrepresented groups. So all of the slides will take this form from now on. So I'll try to hold questions to the end, but if you don't understand what's going on in the slides, please raise your hand. So this shows that after this kind of training is put in, so companies put this in at different times, we measure when they put it in, and then we look at all the years after, controlling for everything else. So we can net out the effects of this legalistic diversity training for managers. And when you see a bar, it means there's a statistically significant effect for this group. So white women who hold about 20% of managerial jobs, 22%, see a decline of about 11 or 12% in their share of management jobs. So they go from, say, 22% to 20% just because of this one intervention, the most expensive thing companies do to promote diversity in the United States. This is where almost all the money goes. And it's not having a positive effect on any group. You can imagine you're a white man manager. When we interview people, they're angry when they come out of these trainings. They feel like they've been blamed for something that they didn't do. They feel that they've been called racist and sexist, transphobic, you name it. They're angry, and this doesn't bode well for the people who work for them. The other way a second way companies try to prevent managers from acting on their individual biases, what's going on in their minds, is to make them promote people using job tests. So this is just an example of an array of HR rules that are supposed to prevent biased managers from acting on those biases. So job tests for managers, you're supposed to use the test to hire people. Job tests are showing negative effects for all 7 historically under disadvantaged groups. I want to point something out. The groups, these are usually standardized tests. They don't develop their own job tests. It's too expensive. There are various companies that sell these tests. 3 groups, well, all these groups in actual, when you actually look at the real world, all these groups, the people who are actually taking managerial tests, do about the same. There have been a bunch of studies of people who actually take the test. 3 groups do better than white men: white women, Asian American men, and Asian American women. This is just, you're a manager, and you're told, we don't really trust you to choose your own employees. We don't trust you to choose people to promote. So you have to prove that you've chosen the right person by giving them a test. Well, that is apparently backfiring, because they're apparently saying, well, if that's your attitude, I'll just hire whoever I want. I won't even pay attention to diversity. And this is a civil rights grievance procedure. So this is what happens when companies put these in. this procedure allows your employee, if you're a white male manager, to charge you with discrimination within the company and to try to take away your job, to try to get you fired. It almost never works, but it certainly pisses off managers. And if people who actually file complaints are highly likely to be sued or harassed or driven out of their jobs. I think that's one reason we see adverse effects from these. So these things, about 97% of firms have a civil rights grievance procedure, very similar for sexual harassment grievance procedures. So the problem with this approach of trying to target individual bias is it antagonizes people. It antagonizes the people who are making hiring and promotion decisions, white men, and it tends to backfire. A lot of other studies have shown this, but not in as systematic way as we have. But there are a number of other things that work. And so the rest of the talk is about things that some companies do and more companies could be doing. And I think what's in the context that we face right now, where the Trump administration is on the warpath to end DEI programming. In this context, I think some of what I have to say is actually good news, because the things that people hate, I just covered. The things that anti-DEI warriors are attacking, I just covered. Most of the things I'll talk about now don't even necessarily count as DEI programs. So the question is, can we identify biases in our career systems that you could address by changing how the career systems operate? And can we address those biases in a way that won't backfire the way diversity training has backfired? So I'll just take a few examples. For each slide I show you, we have a bunch of different slides in the book showing that similar practices work similarly. Most employers for decades have recruited college graduates at the alma maters of their existing employees. So think of a big finance firm in Hong Kong. All of its senior employees are graduates of this university. They only recruit here. They're probably missing some kinds of students, first-generation college students, immigrant college students. The same thing in the US. If you recruit at Harvard and Yale and Michigan, University of Michigan, you're not going to get a very diverse body. So what if you just recruited all the schools in your area? What if you also try to look for some historically Black colleges and Hispanic serving institutions? Makes a big difference. We see positive effects here. Where there's no bar, it just means that there wasn't a statistically significant effect. So I'm not going to make any claims about that group. This is try to offer every employee in the company a mentor through a formal program that says, please sign up if you would like to have a mentor. Please sign up if you would like to be a mentor. The problem with mentoring is usually when it's informal, people choose people like themselves to mentor, which means that white men often have a disproportionate advantage in the tournament to find mentors. Notice that these are quite big effects. So training to upgrade your job or to move into management is also often informal. So in a department store, a department manager will choose somebody to fill in for them when they're on vacation. And they'll gradually train them. Here's how you do payroll when I'm out for a week. Here's how you do inventory when I'm out for 2 weeks. And then when that person gets promoted or leaves, the person they have been informally mentoring and training moves into their position typically. So if you make that kind of skill training formal and offer it to everybody, wide open, if you want to learn to be a supervisor, if you want to learn to be an assistant manager, sign up here. Classes start on alternate Saturdays. So offering skill training to everybody, this is rotational training, one kind of skill training, is hugely effective. 5 of the historically disadvantaged groups see positive effects. I see some people taking pictures. If you want the slides afterwards, just email me. I'm easy to find. There's nobody with my name. So here are 3 ways. Just recruit broadly, formalize recruitment, recruit at all the universities, formalize mentoring, give everybody a mentor, formalize this kind of informal training, make sure everybody has the chance to sign up for skill training so they can move up. So that's one of the 3 approaches that seems to be very effective. The second, and you'll notice I'm just showing you 3 examples of practices in each bucket. I hope you'll take away the big picture. Ask executives to take charge of this. So let them set goals, give them the sense that it's their job. One problem with diversity management is you have Goldman Sachs. You've got all these people who've had their whole careers in finance. It's a pyramid. And then there's this Goldman Sachs DEI. Those people came from, they might have come from Kraft, a food manufacturing firm. They like come from the DEI movement. They don't really know anything about the business. They're over here. They don't know any of the people in the business. They're just running DEI on their own. They don't know how the career system works. They don't know what the real problems are or what disadvantages people face. You've got to get executives involved if you want to change things. And then you want to make them feel accountable. So one way to get them involved and make them feel accountable is to set diversity goals. This is really pretty effective. Just saying, we would like 50% of the first line managers to be women in 2030. We would like 12% of the first line managers to be Black because 14% of Americans are Black. So setting goals, we see only positive effects for historically disadvantaged groups. This works. After George Floyd was murdered in 2020, hundreds of Fortune 500 companies set goals. Many of them, some of the biggest companies in America, have disavowed them in the last 3 weeks. Said, oh, we had goals, never mind. That's going to disappear from our website. Invite managers to be on a diversity task force. As I said, diversity, often it's like somebody over here who doesn't know the business, who's never met any of the executives in the company who are coming up with these diversity programs that look like they belong at Kraft, not at Chase Manhattan or Bank of America. Or it's completely outsourced to consultants who have nothing to do with the business. So if you want to achieve anything at scale in a big corporation, any manager will tell you, you've got to get everybody involved, make it everybody's job. So the way this works is the CEO typically asks department heads, business unit heads, if they'll join a task force, please, or whatever, send somebody who's high up in their hierarchy, send somebody from the department. And the result is you've got like 18 white men, and then they'll figure out a way to put some diversity on the committee, on the task force, who meet every 3 months, look at the data. HR information systems data are extremely detailed now. You can get PeopleSoft or Workday to emit very detailed data on the careers of everybody you've hired. And like who left, why did they leave? who got promoted, who didn't. So these managers come together in a task force, they look at the data, and then they brainstorm for solutions like, oh, people are leaving, people of color are leaving, how about a mentoring program? They'll put that in and try it. And then they go back to their departments and make sure that people are signing up to be mentors. Make sure that people who don't have mentors are signing up to get mentors. So this is effective, I think, because it really engages existing executives in owning the problem, making them think, this is my job, it isn't somebody else's job. And I'm going to have to keep going to those meetings until we succeed. The most, like when I ask people, when we interview people about like, how was your experience on this task force? The first thing they'll say is, I was just trying to get off the task force. I don't need to be on any committees. So I wanted this to work because I didn't want to have to go back to that meeting anymore. But also they would say, you know, this company operates on meritocracy, I'm sure of it. Although I'm less sure of it than I used to be, because for me, it's operated on meritocracy. I got to be the executive VP of whatever because of my skills and hard work. But then I got this protege in the mentoring program, and I was on this task force, and I started to see, oh yeah, it was true for me, but other people who have similar skills and similar work ethic to me are getting stuck in low-level jobs. I think we're doing something wrong. One way to induce accountability is to put in a diversity manager. And when we interview diversity managers about their job, they'll say, nobody listens to me, I have no power. Don't think I'm controlling anybody. Don't think like we're forcing people to hire Black employees. I'm like, they don't listen to me. But I can look at the Workday output and I can see that a particular department had 50% Asian women applying for jobs, and of the people they hired, only 4% were Asian women. And so I can just go and say to the department head, hey, what's up here? Can I help you the next time? I noticed this. And it turns out, we know from social psychological research that if you think somebody is going to just ask you, hey, how'd you make that decision? Or anything I can help you with? It will make you feel accountable so that the next time when you look at your hiring slate, you'll think, wait a minute, they might ask me again. So even though the diversity manager is completely powerless to change what managers do, they can kind of get them to like think, oh, how's this going to look to somebody? So it just turns out that putting executives in charge helps, and then thinking about what would incentivize them to do something. So putting them on a committee, giving them goals, getting a diversity manager involved so that they know somebody's overseeing what they're doing. So the final thing that's effective are work-life supports, and I'll talk about 3 different kinds. The issue here is that we have this ideal worker norm. Like if you think about the head of a Fortune 500 company, you know, you think of Cary Grant, except maybe older or late in his career. You know, what comes to your mind, your stereotypes are not like 35-year-old Latina woman, but maybe that's who should be the CEO. And this, I think, particularly disadvantages women, and it's one reason that white women have often been the crusaders for expanding work-life supports. Because women are more likely to be in management jobs than women from other groups, so they're more likely to be able to make the case, be in a position to change things. But let's look at the effects of 3 different kinds of work-life supports. So I'm going to talk about the cheapest version of each work-life support. These are essentially free. Work-life supports can be very expensive. So this is encouraging flexible scheduling. So this is not a dictate that people who want to work flexible hours can. Michelle and I just spent 5 months in Amsterdam, and I was amazed to learn that anyone in any job has the right to work part-time forever. Like like in American universities, you can't be a part-time faculty member, period. If you want to be a professor, you'd have to be an instructor at a tenth the salary. So, but this isn't anything like that. This is just, here's how you would apply to have flexible hours to your boss. Once or permanently. So Americans have a right to have a family or medical leave, like when they become new parents, unpaid for 3 months. This is essentially free to the employer. They just have to find somebody to fill in. Often they hire a temp at half the price. Unpaid. So here, we're just looking at, is there a way for me to ask for a leave? Like, is there a button to push on the HR site saying, I want to leave, I'm about to have a baby. I want to leave for this 3 months. So just making it easy to ask doesn't cost anything. This is very different than paying for the leave. Just making it easy to ask for an unpaid leave has significant effects for 4 groups. So some employers pay for childcare on site, or subsidize childcare on site, or subsidize childcare off site. So this is the cheapest childcare option. This is just, here's a list of places in the neighborhood that provide childcare. And sometimes those lists are updated. So like the website says, this one has 10 spots for children under 3 years old right now, and 5 spots for children between 3 and 6. So these are the cheapest versions of these, and I think the effects across these are quite striking. And I think what's going on, and notice that they help non-white men. I think what's going on here is, just even the weakest of supports signal, if you have a work-life problem, don't quit. Come talk to us. Because we're doing all these things that send the signal that we want you to stay around. We want to help you figure out a way to stay with us. So I think that's one insight. Another insight is Black, Hispanic, and Asian American men are much more likely than white men to be in dual career couples where both have to keep working to pay the rent, because they don't have. White families have 10 times the wealth of Black families and of Hispanic families in the US. And we don't know exactly the Asian American to white ratio, but more wealth than Asian American families. And also white workers, Black and Hispanic workers are much more likely to be first-generation college students, and Asian American workers, 65% of Asian Americans in the US workforce are immigrants. So these are not people, so they're typically not coming from families with a lot of wealth in the United States or a lot of status. So one thing I think we've learned from this arc of research is that it's very hard to change people's personal biases in the way we're trying to change them. And many of the things that companies do to promote diversity really aren't working, so we could let them go. But there are other things that seem to be quite effective. And I will say that I think one thing we're seeing here is that For example, when you put managers on diversity task forces, or when you ask them to mentor people who don't look like them, their biases change because they start to see evidence that people from other groups who have not succeeded as well as they have face bias, because they see that in talking to their diverse proteges. They see that in interacting with people and looking at the data on career succession in their own firm, the HR data. They start to see that there is some kind of systemic bias that they could help to address. In some ways, I think the message is kind of encouraging for the present moment in the US. And I assume that some of the anti-DEI sentiments that we've seen in the US will spread around the world. Certainly in Europe, you're seeing a lot of anti-DEI stuff going on right now. So I think it's kind of encouraging because a lot of the things that seem to work are not blaming white men for the problem. They're trying to get white men involved in solving the problem. And they're blaming systemic lack of formality, lack of formal mentoring programs, lack of formal extensive recruitment programs, lack of formal skill training programs that would be more democratic and hence more meritocratic. And finally, when it comes to work-life supports, these are things that used to be only supported by the left in the United States. But increasingly, white nationalism implies that we need to make more babies in the United States. And so what does that mean? It means we need work-life supports to support people through pregnancies, to keep people in the labor market, to encourage people to have a third and fourth and 12th child in the white nationalist mindset, to encourage that so that there will be plenty of workers born in the US. So that's not the best motivation for being in favor of work-life supports, but it does bring the left and the right kind of together on wanting paid childcare, family and medical leaves, and flexible scheduling, things that used to be only supported by the left. Thank you so much for being here on a Friday afternoon. Thank you.
Okay, I'm Sida Liu. I'm just here as the moderator. So I think we have about 20 minutes for Q&A. So any questions? Yes, please.
One thing I'm really curious as we know that like STEM focused industries was in like how as for East Asian females that storage and so I'm wondering if there are indeed facts of the diversity program.
There are some patterns of different effects across industries. In general, I would say, well, if you look at leadership roles in tech, for example, you do see more Asian American men than you used to see. But in general, I think the pattern looks like Asian American men and women are both facing discrimination in the scientific labor market. We see that, for example, in other research we do on faculty diversity. It looks like Asian American men and women benefit disproportionately from policies that try to eliminate discrimination. So I think it's hard to draw conclusions. I will say, if you look at the corporate workforce, Asian American men and women are disadvantaged relative to white men and women in that they don't hold as many management positions as they ought to, given that they're much more highly educated on average than white men and women. So I personally think that Asian American men and women face discrimination in scientific and technical labor markets, particularly when you get to the higher ranks. Because if you look at the tech firms, they publish their own data. In the middle ranks, you have actually quite a few tech workers who are Asian American men and women, often coming on H-1B, H-2B visas, not that many in upper management. So my kind of big picture look at this is that Asian Americans still face a lot of discrimination in the US labor market, even in tech fields and science fields, where the stereotypes, the intersectional stereotypes suggest that they're better.
And one related question is more on the subgroup differences between. And I'm just wondering if there are any current research or no the subgroup.
You know, we, and I think a lot of other people who study these data, are stymied by the fact that most data sets don't distinguish between East Asian and South Asian workers.
That's kind of sad.
Yeah, I mean, there are one or two data sets that do, but they, like, there's something called the Survey of Doctor Recipients, where you can figure out whether the person is a green card holder, and you can usually figure out their country of origin. But those data are extremely difficult to access, and my guess is that the federal government will stop allowing us to access them if they haven't already stopped. Good question.
Yeah, please, in the back. Yeah.
Fascinating talk, and that shows of investors backing companies.
Well, I mean, I don't know if you've noticed, but there have been shareholder resolutions to complete, like Costco just won against a shareholder proposition to get rid of all DEI efforts. For a while, you know, we had some investment firms that sold ESG products that were supposed to be environmental, social, which means diversity, governance means corporate governance, that kind of supported left-wing ideals on all three dimensions. A lot of those have, in some states, there have been efforts to make it illegal for pension funds to invest in those, for example, like public pension funds. There's been quite a lot of backlash against those. So my guess is we're going to see those being less effective. My guess would also be that under this administration, the SEC may not allow pension, or may try to prevent pension monies and other kinds of like public investments to go into companies that are pursuing ESG. So does that address your question? Yeah, I think that's kind of where we're headed now.
Thank you, Professor Dalvin. Incredible talk. I'm aware there's a phenomenon called the glass cliff, where minorities, especially women and other racial minorities, are appointed to managerial positions only to take the heat, basically, and take the blame. So I'm curious, we've seen a lot of incredible gains in diversity along many dimensions. Do you have a sense of how long these gains last?
So the idea of the glass cliff is that a woman will be appointed CEO of a company that's about to collapse, like, or about to face a shareholder revolt or something like that. I haven't seen any research, but I may have missed it, on how long people last in those positions, or if there's still a tendency to appoint women. It's basically up to corporate boards to decide who becomes the next CEO. And in some states, boards have become more diverse. In California, there's a soft requirement that boards have more women on them. I don't know. I would worry that the SEC will become less attentive to diversity. That there have been moves by the SEC for firms to become more transparent about their board members and their board selection processes. I would worry that those things will go away, and then we'll just see fewer women and people of color in top management positions. But do you have a sense?
I don't have a sense myself. I studied China, and what I do find is that there are gains from gender preferential policies. But what I find is that whenever there is a round of layoffs, like during recession, women are also the first to go. So that's just some evidence from China. I was curious as to what the state of things are in the US.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely seen that as well. There's a lot of evidence that so we have a paper looking at the Great Recession and its effect on faculty hiring, and across a wide range of US, especially research-oriented universities, we see that rookie hires, new PhD hires into assistant professor jobs, women are much less likely to be hired between 2009 and it's still going on in 2015. White women, Black women, Hispanic women, Asian American women, and minority men are less likely to be hired. And white men, although they're getting fewer jobs than they were, they're getting proportionally more jobs than they were. So it does seem like in times of crisis, and there's a lot of evidence that women, even controlling for tenure on the job, women and people of color are more likely to be fired during recessions, during layoffs. So we haven't had a serious recession in a few years.
Knock on wood. Thank you.
How are international students doing in general on the labor? Last 20 years, how are they doing in general?
Unfortunately, in the corporate data, we don't know the international status of the employees and companies. So that's something we can't track over time. I mean, the data are great in that they're very comparable over time, and they cover every private company in the US with at least 100 employees. But unfortunately, that's just something we can't look at. Affirmative action was something that was started by John F. Kennedy in 1961 when he required federal contractors to not just say they're not discriminating, but actually take some positive step, affirmative action, do something to end the practices that had resulted in discrimination. That terminology kind of got dropped by most firms during the Reagan administration, because Reagan said, we don't need this anymore. We're done. We're post-racial. We've fixed everything. Thank you very much. You can go home. So, and Trump is doing that in spades. So a lot of the practices that were created under affirmative action orders just got renamed to be diversity practices. And there's surprising continuity in, like, when I talked about the systemic changes that work, recruiting broadly, mentoring, and skill training, those are things that companies were adopting in 1961. Many companies adopted right after the first affirmative action edict came out. So it's also true for diversity training, which was then called RIT. So I feel like there's a continuity, some of the nomenclature changes, but there's a lot of continuity in what firms have done.
Thank you for your presentation. I have two questions. One is related to diversity. Well, that we talk about diversity organization. That is indicated would be around 5 to 10 years. But I'm just curious, are there any organizations aware of that work on it really from the bottom up? We are talking diversity, education, mentoring, training, all the way to the management, starting from the top board of directors, going down, and then from the bottom up. Because what I hear you saying, your data, you talked about some parts of it. So I'm just wondering if there has been more systemic changes you're aware of that's being carried on by these corporation or organization. And secondly, what are the results and who are they? What are the companies? So that's my first question.
Well, there are a lot of organizations that are working to, for example, try to get places for inner city kids in poor high schools into prep schools on full scholarships. And some of those programs have been very effective. There are also, a lot of firms have internal internship programs where they try to bring people from, say, inner city high schools and inner city, like City University of New York colleges that are open access, bring them into internships in finance firms, tech firms. So there are a lot of companies that have their own programs, and then there are some separate programs that try to provide interns from such backgrounds to all kinds of different companies. Is that the kind of thing you have in mind from the bottom up?
No, well, what I have in mind, for example, bottom up means you involve the community, people, and also commitment from the top and working all the way from top and bottom up and covering all areas, like hiring, like you said, diversity manager, organization, changes, training, evaluation, different programming, different mentoring, all the way more systemically change, focus on, and institutionalize.
Yeah, I mean, there are some firms that have tried to institutionalize changes at the community level and also within the firm. IBM is one that has been successful at doing that. I think it's headquartered in Rochester, New York, which is or upstate New York, quite diverse, racially diverse area. And they've been quite successful at trying to get more people to finish college, get more Black people to finish college, get those people into their own training programs and move them up. I think it's mostly firms that have been successful at doing the kind of integrated thing you're talking about.
Right, like IBM. Okay, great, thank you. My second question is around global diversity. So with globally looking at the situation and the tremendous change right now ongoing with the Trump's policy. So what is your general sense the diversity changes in globally? Because I do see some corporations, trying to hire diversity and work globally, and they've been doing well, but there seems to be a backlash going back and forth. So what's your sense about it? Where are we going in this field?
Well, I mean, I think in the US, I guess as background, the way I think about global diversity programs is that most of them actually originated in the US and then spread through multinationals to other countries. And sometimes domestic companies in other countries pick them up. And, Japan, for example, Japan has a gender diversity issue more than anything else because they don't allow much immigration. But Japan has adopted a bunch of kind of US-style gender diversity programs. So my question about the effects of what's going on in the US on global diversity is, if US companies cut back on diversity programs, usually they've been the models that domestic companies look to, like in Japan or in France or in England or in Germany, because there hasn't been the imperative or incentive to develop diversity programs locally to the same extent. Like the EU has anti-discrimination law, but it's kind of weak and it doesn't really target employers. So employers don't feel particularly compelled to try to stay out of court. So I think the cutback in the US may have ripple effects in other countries, many of which were like trying to do some stuff in this domain.
Thank you.
There's another question. Yes, please. How about we collect both questions? That's 4 minutes.
Okay, so I will cut it short. So I'm just curious about the difference between your conclusion and the four C's. Like the first one is more direct way to change market. And the other three, if I can call that, is a kind of direct way to change the situation. So how, and the first one is not so effective, and the other three seems more effective. So I'm curious about how will you interpret it direct way and the indirect way to this situation?
Well, see, I would put it the other way around. The real problems we have are in the systems. Oh, we're going to collect questions.
No, it's okay. Go ahead. Since you're already talking.
Are in the systems that we have, like the hiring, mentoring, and skill training systems. The problem there is those systems are just closed. So that's an explicit problem. And what's going on in people's heads is actually implicit bias. And it turns out that it's hard to change that. But you can change how you recruit and mentor and give people skill training. So I see it as the other way around. Like it's just hard to change through training or threats what's going on in people's heads. So, but you can change it through their experiences.
I had a feeling that we actually made the implicit thing implicit, but we changed it also still in implicit way.
Ah, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, in the back, last question.
I've worked in corporate for over a decade and got some. It's helpful to hear you say that these practices, whilst I've seen organizational development minority groups across Asia going at a very slow matches the data. So I'm curious, are there new practices? Power up some of these such as all of this stuff, and it's not really having implemented.
Well, interesting question to end on. There are some new things. So one thing that's become popular are formal employee referral programs with incentives. And we see that those are super effective, partly because often new hires come through referrals. Many companies will say our best hires come through referrals. And so a lot of companies have been doubling down on using referrals instead of advertising on Ideal or whatever. So what we see is that when companies put these programs in and advertise them to all of their employees and give an incentive, they see very significant increases in race and ethnic and gender diversity, not surprisingly, because they're just getting the best person this person knows, and that person is probably from the same group. So that's been very effective. Employee resource groups are often thought of as not effective, but they can be very useful partners for that kind of program, for example. So companies that have employee resource groups to get the word out about referral programs see a lot more change than companies that don't. But it's funny because often when I talk to groups of business people, somebody will just say, "What's the magic bullet? What's the magic bullet?" And I'm like, the things that Lockheed Martin was doing in 1961, right after it got a huge military airplane contract, and right after John F. Kennedy required affirmative action, just like open all jobs to Black and Hispanic people, go to those high schools, try to recruit people, open skill training to those groups, give these people mentors. Those work really well. They worked really well then, and they're still among the most effective things. I do think that our findings about work-life programs are often unknown to people, like to DEI people, partly because sometimes that stuff's out of DEI, the DEI office, and they're just like not registering how important the work-life programs are, not only for women of color, but for men of color.
Okay, on that positive note, let's thank Professor Frank Dobbin again for this very insightful talk.